Hey, it's Mike Kearney.
And Deb Golden,
hosts of the Resilient Podcast.
You've been hearing a lot about the COVID crisis with Mike, and that's not going to change.
But we recognize you may also be looking for insights that can help you make decisions and take action as we emerge from the crisis.
As we come together to meet the challenges and embrace the opportunities crisis brings, we're going to be bringing more resilient content you've come to expect from us.
You'll still get the unfiltered leadership insights you've come to rely on from Resilient. Whether you're a new listener in the Confronting the COVID-19 series, or you've been with us from the beginning.
We hope you enjoy this episode on cyber topics. After all, cyber's everywhere.
Organizations are getting smarter about cyber, and for good reason. Being prepared in today's cyber landscape requires so much more than just protecting assets and preparing your front line of defense. A solid cyber strategy should also help an organization get out in front of risk and plan for what needs to happen to recover when crises hit. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte's Advisory Cyber Risk Services practice. I had the opportunity to talk with Lori Havlovitz, CISO at Cardinal Health, and I'm thrilled to share our conversation with you. In this episode, Lori discusses how organizations can predict and prepare for crises using cyber intelligence data and a strong resiliency plan.
We have to be up 100%. And so we talk about that a lot. Definitely the tabletops and war games are really important, because that response that you need to have to be resilient if and when something happens, unless you practice it, it's going to be really hard.
She also shares tactics she's employed to increase stakeholder engagement and manage cyber change, and discusses key cyber considerations for the manufacturing process, as well as how to get cyber in the process early when we talk about products and solutions and getting things out to market. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Tune in now for Lori Havlovitz. Hello, Lori. Welcome, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to talk today.
Most definitely. And before we get started, and to give the audience a little bit of more about kind of who you are and how they could get excited about hearing from you, I am super excited to hear, not only are you obviously joining me today for this podcast, but I hear you're a podcast fan. So maybe you could give us a little bit of insight of what you like to listen to.
Absolutely. I really love the medium of podcasts. It's obviously kind of the new radio. And I listen to all sorts of things. I listen to podcasts about security, but also just interesting people and their lives. My most recent one that I've really enjoyed is Dolly Parton's America. Didn't know a lot about Dolly. I am a country music fan, but not the old country, more the new country. And so it's been really great to hear more about her life and impact on the world.
Well, I have not listened to it yet, but I certainly will. And I think there's one other fun fact that I found truly amazing. So maybe we'll share with the audience as well. I hear you are an avid snow skier who learned at a very, very early age.
I did. So not to age myself, but young children weren't skiing. When I started skiing at the age of 3, it wasn't very normal. And now it's a big thing for our younger kids to get going. And it's great because you have no fear at the age of 3. My parents actually were part of the National Ski Patrol at a small little resort here in Ohio, Mad River Mountain. And we really don't have mountains in Ohio, but we gave it a go anyway. And my mom said I was so little and had lack of attention. The ski school folks didn't know how to give me lessons, so they would break it up in 15-minute intervals so I could have fun with everybody else. But yes, love to ski, continue to do it today, and I love to go fast. One of my favorite things is go fast down a really steep mountain.
Wonderful. And I was kind of chuckling when you said you didn't have mountains. I learned to ski in the Northeast where they didn't have mountains either, and everything was pretty much skiing on ice. I don't think they actually had powder snow. So we would always joke that if you could learn to ski in the Northeast, you could actually ski on real snow out west. So I always love to hear everyone's stories about skiing. It sounds like we both missed mountains and massive snow piles, but it sounds like you obviously got your courage up at 3, and I'm super impressed by that. I think children are obviously fearless. So good to know you're still keeping up with the skiing as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's transition a little bit to continue to get to know you. I understand you started your career in computer engineering, following in the footsteps of, I believe, your older brothers, but ultimately switched to business, specifically finance and MIS in undergrad and later to your MBA. Maybe explain a little bit more about this. Interestingly enough, I was an undergrad in finance and management. And so I'm curious to know, was there something that, it changed your career path? Did you wake up one day and I just really don't want to do this? What led you into business?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I always really loved business, even in high school. We had a business class in high school that we got actually money to work with and checking accounts. And I really found it interesting. And meanwhile, my brothers were in college doing computer engineering and then going off to their careers to work at technology companies. So I just felt like, hey, that's worked out for them. That's a great path. Let me give it a try. And actually, my freshman year at Ohio State, those first engineering classes just did not click with me. It's not how my mind works. And I didn't realize that I could do technology in the School of Business and started to explore that a little bit. And once I got there, it all made more sense. It was tying technology to driving forward a business rather than creating engineering behind solutions. They both all come together. I would say here at Cardinal, we've got folks that have an engineering background and more of a business background. But for me, that business tie was super important to how I saw technology going forward.
What advice would you have for college students who maybe, struggling to find their path or not sure where they want to go? I know I've got a sophomore in college right now who I think knows where she's headed, but she's also, maybe I want to try this out, or maybe I want to try this, and still experimenting, which I, of course, encourage. And so what advice would you have for college students who are trying to figure out what they want to do?
Try everything. And technology is part of every field now. You can't escape it. So get that foundation in technology and then try different classes in college, but also get internships. It's okay if you change your mind after that first internship, and think big. That was advice I gave to my niece, Sally, who got an internship after her freshman year, which was really impressive. She was in chemical engineering, but it was at a very small company here in Columbus. And I said, next time, think bigger. And she thought bigger. She got an internship at Apple next, and then Tesla after that. So don't think small when you're exploring what you want to do. Think big, get those opportunities, jobs, internships, classes, try it all out while you're in college and also while you're at your first job.
And that leads into my next question around, as you transitioned and obviously started your journey at Cardinal, I've heard that you've been kind of, one of the things is to experience new roles. So similar to your think bigger, which I love. How do you experience new roles to kind of gain insight into company culture? What is, some people would say, trying new roles or thinking big is scary, or maybe they're not sure how to do it. And so how do you help people or advise them to adapt and maybe build credibility as you're trying out new things or thinking bigger?
Yeah, good question. And it's something that I talk to folks a lot about, and women too. I'm sure you've heard that women feel the need to check every box when they're looking at a new job, potential new job, yep, before they even apply. And I've never been that woman, never will be that woman. If so, I would not be in the job I am in today. So I look at it as everyone brings something to the table, and you can tie adjacencies to a new role. So let's say that, my career in particular, I started in the application development space and learned a lot in that space. And then from there, went into a variety of new roles, but always had that foundation that I could tie back to. So I did enterprise architecture. Well, being able to say, hey, I've done application development, and I can tie that to creating a strategy of technology. And here are the skills that tie to that. I also went into more of a shared services infrastructure type of role after that. Well, let me talk to you about how my application development experience and my enterprise architecture experience will let me set a strategy for my new team. We'll make sure that the infrastructure that I'm running supports the applications, et cetera. And then when this opportunity came up in the security space, I was able to say, hey, I've done operations, I've done strategy, I've done application development. It all ties to security today. So that was that next step. So that's the advice I definitely give to all the folks that I mentor and coach is, how does the experience that you've had tied to that new space? And then how can you get the experience you don't have and turn it into that role that you want in the future?
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, I think there's so many people who, and I love your analogy of, do we need to check every box? I think people get hung up often in the need to do that, or the compelling desire that if they don't, something will be missing, as opposed to just candidly going for it. And I think your encouragement of understanding how skills can be transferable, how understanding that, you're qualified for these roles. Did I check every box? Should I be here? Do I need to be here? Can I represent? And instead, maybe perhaps look at things in a different light, like you've shed. So I appreciate that significance, I think, in terms of understanding the credibility that you could bring and how you adapt to new scenarios. So thanks for that insight. I think as you think about how you've spent your career, it looks like you've spent the bulk of your career at Cardinal. What initially attracted you to Cardinal or the healthcare industry in general? And then I guess, what keeps you there?
Yeah, great question. So I've been at Cardinal since the late 90s. And at the time, very fast growing company, just in the pharmaceutical distribution space. I love that I could come in and try out all sorts of different parts of IT at a company that was really making a difference. And we always are looking at patient first and being a trusted partner in healthcare. And so that mission has been there since I started 20 years ago and has continued. And then, like almost every person that has been at Cardinal for quite a while, it becomes personal at some point. So I'm a breast cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in 2007, and it got really personal when I started to see the products that we either manufacture or distribute and partner with healthcare providers on using started to be used on me. So one particular area was we have a business that does nuclear medicine, and one of the diagnostic tests that I had before my breast cancer surgery was that product. And I was like, I know what that is. That's being used on me, which is a little scary. But how proud I was to really see my company in action. And it's a bigger mission than just every other company out there when you're talking about the health of you, your loved ones. It's what drives us as a company for sure. And you feel it when you're a part of the company. There's a lot of pride in that, but also a lot of accountability and responsibility that we take very, very seriously.
Well, I thank you for your transparency and your being your authentic self, listening to your story, giving me goosebumps, even though we're not sitting in the same room. Obviously, your story is incredibly inspiring to think about, to your point, how everything is truly personal and how your own journey and your own career. But not only that, beyond the paper, if you will, and taking your personal experiences truly to heart. So thank you sincerely for providing that and being transparent with your story. So I certainly appreciate that. And at the end of the day, I also want to congratulate you for being a survivor. I know, and I'm sure that was incredibly challenging, and to be surrounded by an organization to help lift you up, as well as I'm sure your friends and family, is certainly very, very valuable. And like I said, vulnerable. So thank you again for being your authentic self. So as we shift gears a little bit and we think about your role then at Cardinal, since it sounds like you've been able to be there and probably try lots of different things, whether that be, roles, jobs, divisions, you've probably seen change also at the organization, and ultimately land you where you are today as the CISO. So again, congratulations on that huge, huge accomplishment. I know you've been preparing for this for some time, I would think maybe, or maybe it just landed and you were like, wow, I wasn't expecting this. So maybe, do you have goals and aspirations for this new role? Were you anticipating it? Was this something that you thought, I really want to make sure I achieve? Or was it something that just kind of came to you and you were like, you know what, I'm going to tackle this head on, kind of thinking back to your think bigger? Was it something that you had been thinking you wanted to achieve?
Yeah, because I had been in IT for such a long time, and then security for the last 4 years. I was at a crossroads, quite honestly, and I did some soul searching of, do I want to continue in security or go down more of a CIO path? And I decided to double down in security. And what excites me about it is I like change. I like to protect. I really enjoy that. I feel very honored to be in the role that I'm protecting the company I love. I've said that many times here. So that's been great. When I look at a security team and the one that I've built here with a great team, it's every aspect of IT too. So that's kind of exciting, architecture and operations and strategy. So that's been really great. As far as stepping into the new role and how am I looking at the team, we really want to raise the bar. And part of that is getting much more aligned with our business areas. So we are expanding the BISO organization that we've had for over a year to really become more regionally based and much more integrated with our business areas. In addition, our security architecture and operations team are raising the bar on how do we automate even more. We've done some really good work there, but we want to get more ahead of the threat and also be self-healing, right? If we're seeing that something is happening in an environment, automatically block things or automatically heal and get back to a healthy space and remove threats. And then we also have privacy and compliance that's just part of our world and definitely part of Cardinal Health, and making sure we're looking at that with a risk-based lens. So a lot of great things. In addition, we're kind of raising the bar on our IT risk governance practices with a lot of leaders, business leaders through the company. So a lot of great things going on. I'm really excited, and it's a great opportunity for me and all of my team members who are really jazzed about where we're going.
That's amazing. I mean, obviously you get to help create the journey and the strategy and really pushing the organization forward. So I'm sure you're super excited about the ability to do that and really take your team along the journey as well. One thing that I'd be interested in hearing about is, what do you think it takes to become a resilient organization? I mean, we hear about crisis and recovery all the time. And really, I think, particularly as I have more and more conversations at the board level and we look to hear what people are interested in and or how to understand, what do you think are the key components of a strong, resilient organization, or even just an understanding in your plans? Like, what do we do and how should we actually become a proactive, if you will, resilient organization?
Great question. And it's something I think about a lot, especially with our role in healthcare and impact on the patients. We have to be up 100%. And so we talk about that a lot. Definitely the tabletops and war games are really important, because that response that you need to have to be resilient if and when something happens, unless you practice it, it's going to be really hard. And so my team actually runs tabletops with areas of our business that have paid off, where we actually have had some issues and we've practiced our response. We've also documented crisis processes and playbooks in order to be ready to respond. So just having that mindset that we always need to be ready and we need to practice and flex that muscle on a pretty consistent basis is something that is always top of mind to me and something that we're building into our processes. In addition to that, we have recently finished a migration to the cloud, and there have been some really great wins there on ability to recover if you do it the right way and you make sure to plan for it and test it in a similar way from a more technical side.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of tabletopping and wargaming. I think it's incredibly valuable to help people, to use your words, to always be ready, because I do think in lots of situations we'll find that some organizations have they may have a backup and recovery plan, but perhaps it's for an application, a solution, a department. But when you really look at the necessary interoperability across the line, that's what we tend not to see tested and tried. So how do we work together? Who does the communication? What are we actually doing when it's a crisis versus we've got all the time in the day to try to figure out how to recover a system? And so I 100% agree with you that tabletop exercises is a great way to practice response and crisis recovery. So I'm glad to hear that it's in action at Cardinal under your direction. So that's wonderful to hear. One of the things we continue to look at is around cyber threat intelligence data. As you know, data is everywhere. Our adversaries are everywhere, and our adversaries candidly are making faster traction than we are, and not because we're not trying, but obviously they are, in some instances, nation states. There's bad actors. There's all kinds of influences that are causing our adversaries to be progressing at a much faster pace. How do you think we could either A, get in front of it, and maybe we can't get in front of it, but how can we better understand cyber threat data? And perhaps maybe what are some of the challenges you've experienced as you try to kind of put your arms around what are the threats and how do we address them?
Yeah, it's something that is definitely top of mind for me and my team. And we actually partner with Deloitte for our security operations. So we have partnered on this particular space too. So there's so many threats out there. And when you're not in an industry that has been a traditional target, right? We're not utilities, we're not in that space. It is sometimes hard to get your mind wrapped around what is the threat that we're facing, or are we facing all of them, right? So that's been interesting to try to determine. And we do watch, we'll see threat actors that will come back, and we watch their behavior and definitely research what is the motive there to make sure that we're putting the right controls up to stop anything really bad from impacting our business. So it's top of mind. It's something we're continuing to develop, and I don't have the answer on it. I'll be honest. I think getting more analytics in the space, getting more data and collaborating. We definitely collaborate in healthcare on threats and what we're seeing and what our peers are seeing and what our customers and manufacturers are seeing. So continuing that discussion too, I think is a big part of it with we're in the HISAC and making sure that we're getting all the information, not just our lens, because what happens to our customers or manufacturers, it's a good chance it maybe get directed at us too.
Yeah, and I mean, the ISACs are a great way as well to share data and share information. It's not uncommon what you've said around, we're not sure what to do. I think there's also this notion of, I call it the glassy-eyed effect. I think there's so much cyber. People are also like, what do we do? Where do we start? And then candidly, I think people get tired of hearing cyber. So sometimes It's like, okay, well, yes, we know there's an adversary, and yes, we know there's a threat, and yes, we know there's all types of activities, but kind of where do we start? And I do believe that analytics and artificial intelligence and leveraging process robotics, if you will, is a means to simply just weed through the volume of data so that you can actually get to something that's consumable. Because obviously, and certainly with healthcare, it's no different. You've got medical devices. You've got many different types of quote unquote Internet of Things that you're not just talking about a building with, the four walls and everybody's plugging into their laptops in the office. We're well beyond that in today's day and age. And so it certainly becomes arduous when you think about all the data that we're trying to collect to try to understand where and how the adversary is going to hit. And so I couldn't agree with you more that leveraging capabilities like analytics to, like I said, just even weed through the data to be able to come up with some consumable portion to be able to review, read, react, respond, et cetera, is incredibly important. So I couldn't agree with you more from that perspective. And maybe as we shift a little bit, when we look at, getting smarter from a cyber perspective, I mean, cyber, and as I just mentioned, is everywhere, right? Not just in our data, it's obviously in the business. And I think historically, while you've been at Cardinal for a while, I have been at Deloitte for the majority of my career. And we've certainly seen technology evolve, right? Technology used to only be in the technology shop, quote unquote, if you will. And we now, obviously, technology is in the business. Technology is driving the business, and the need for integration with cyber and obviously how you align your roles and goals is very important into the business. And so do you find it's easy, difficult, or maybe perhaps what do you think are some of the types of capabilities that people can use to help get the business moving along and integrated, and what's most important to them? Because I often find they too are struggling with what should we focus on. We know cyber is important because we hear it, but we too don't really know where we should start. So what do you think have been some kind of lessons learned, or how have you been able to kind of bring the stakeholders along on your journey?
One of the most important conversations that we had in the past few years was to talk about what are the most important assets to our company. Let's start there, the crown jewels kind of conversation. And then let's talk about protecting those crown jewels, being able to respond if something happens to them. And that's where we kind of circling back to the resiliency conversation of if it's when, what would we do in a situation if we did have those most important assets impacted? And what are the responsibilities of my team? What are the responsibilities of the technology leaders across the company? But most importantly, those business leaders to think about it. What would you do in this situation? Who are your biggest stakeholders to talk to? And then it ties back to investments in security and IT to say, when we're going forward, we're going to look at foundational items as well as those most important assets and continue to come up with, knowing the threat landscape, et cetera, what are going to be the best areas to invest in to protect them and be able to detect if something's happening. So that was a really healthy conversation because we're a very big company. We do a lot of different things. And we had that conversation with our CEO and his entire operating committee to get alignment. These are the most important assets to Cardinal Health. And this is what we're going to do about them. And this is how we're going to be ready to respond if something does happen. So that's been really healthy to get those folks engaged. And it's made the conversations easier after that because we're not kind of going in saying it's this big thing. And that is hard to digest and understand. But when you say, hey, let's talk about the most important part of your business and how we protect that, that has been a game changer in the conversation.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think one thing I've heard you mention in other settings is this notion of a security governance committee. Maybe you can shed some light on what you mean by that and really how that would help to drive business involvement.
Yeah, we've had a committee in place for quite a while, and it's really an important part of our approach to security and IT as a whole. And that crown jewels kind of conversation is definitely part of it of, hey, these are the most important areas to us. And who gets to make decisions about, let's say we're deciding to accept a risk, or let's say we're deciding to mitigate a risk, but maybe not all the way, or we're going to avoid a risk. Who gets to make those decisions? And it shouldn't be my team. It should be those business leaders across the company. So we've got a really active group that is part of that discussion. It ties back, obviously, to policies and standards and having those in place, but having their voices and having them own it from more of a business perspective rather than it being a technology discussion has been really, really powerful.
That's amazing. And I think one thing is that, again, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on this. While we all have good intentions and certainly setting up the committees, having communication, working through challenges, we certainly, often experience resistance. And candidly, that's not just with cyber, that's in, every organization. And so, has there been some, story or example perhaps you might want to share with the audience of how you've tackled a resistance to perhaps a new cyber program or controls that were, not adopted, or something that you felt that was critical, but yet wasn't being listened to or adopted? Because I think we often are, everything is great and wonderful. And, sharing the stories of how we've worked through maybe a personal challenge in the organization would be, I think, extremely helpful for our listeners.
Great question. One of the ones that surprised me and something super important to do, and I think everyone out there can relate, was locking down the USB port became a very emotional topic. and I never use my USB port. I don't have one anymore because I've got a Mac. It's something that I let go of many, many, many years ago, way before I was even in security. And I was super surprised by how that really became a takeaway, viewed as a takeaway across the organization, how much awareness we needed to do to explain the threat, and also business threat, not related to security, around data leaving, don't want that to happen at any company. So it was really a surprising one. It was one of those that we had a plan, we're going to roll it out pretty quickly, and all of a sudden the nerve got hit and all sorts of communications kept coming back of can't live without this, and no, you can't take it, and I'm holding on to it. And so we actually went through a process to say, okay, there are maybe some business cases that need this, and you don't get to go and use any thumb drive that you find on the ground. It's going to be a lockdown one with a key to it and all of that. But really surprised me that, number one, people didn't understand the threat that comes with those kind of devices and how dependent, even though the world has kind of moved on from cloud storage, et cetera, it was not something that people were ready to let go of. So that was kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, no, and I have to tell you, certainly, I'm sure lots of people don't think about all the nuances. I mean, I was talking before around cyber being everywhere. I mean, devices and USB cybersecurity is certainly important. People are downloading and uploading things all the time. So certainly a critical area. And I probably think most people might not be thinking about that first and foremost. So good to hear you guys had a plan in action once you realized the consequences that could be associated with that. So moving a little bit along the lines of, we're here to protect you. And obviously being in, life sciences, healthcare industry, we think about all the great changes that have been coming along there, everything from medical devices, as I mentioned before, to even just the way that hospital supplies are manufactured and the advancement of some of the medical devices that are being leveraged. You can now obviously, and have been for some time, able to obviously swallow a pill camera, right, to see all the things that are going on inside of your body, which I find incredibly fascinating. But obviously with that also comes challenges for cyber. Some people don't even think about that when we're thinking about the medical advances. And so what types of considerations do you factor into knowing that in your industry, there's so many advancements happening, pretty much on a regular basis? So how do you stay ahead of industrial controls or, the Internet of Things, if you will, when you think about cyber?
Good question. I think first and foremost is having that seat at the table with our business to understand where they're going next. And yeah, there are so many great capabilities coming onto the market. Just automation too in the distribution space is super, super important to getting more efficient and serving our customers in the best way. So that BISO role that I talked about earlier on, being partnered with the business to make sure that we know what's coming in order to make sure that we get the right security either built into a product or additional controls stood up to get ready for a new launch of a technical area. When you talk about the device space, which is pretty small area of our business, we don't have a lot of medical devices that are quote smart. We've got some making sure that that's built into those product teams that are engineering those devices, which we've definitely been engaged there. And then technical solutions too, making sure the application development teams that are creating products with our businesses are thinking security first and build those processes in. We've been spending time with some of those product teams to say, okay, how can we automate things in the CI/CD pipeline? So it's not a choice. It's part of your process, just like a quality process for a product would be that it's always built into what we're putting out there, no matter what the technology advancements are.
That's wonderful. I think when we think about, I actually was writing it down as you were saying it, cyber first. I love it. And it's in the context of being able to do so with a seat at the table as you're looking at product definition or solution definition. I think oftentimes, again, in a sense of urgency, speed to get things to market and whether that's a solution or, something that's from a process perspective, I tend to believe that people get, again, like I said, caught up in that speed to go and often say, well, we'll just deal with the cyber aspect of it last or later. So I love that you're at the table having active conversations to be able to get cyber ingrained up front. Doesn't mean that all the bells and whistles perhaps are in there up in the very first part of this journey, but as you continue to progress on that journey, working with the business or the product and solution owner. So fabulous suggestion for those listening if they're struggling with how to get cyber integrated into their solution sets. So now we come to what I think is my favorite part of the podcast, which is what I'll call rapid fire questions. Don't feel obligated to answer with one word. Certainly feel free to elongate as you feel appropriate. One thing that I always love to hear and ask everyone is what, who are your influencers? Who would you say has influenced you personally or professionally to where you are today?
Well, first and foremost, my parents, they were great role models for me from an aspect of play hard, work hard. They definitely worked very hard. Both of them actually were working while going to college. My mom actually got a master's degree while working. That's hard with a family to do that. But then, like I mentioned, we were skiing on the weekends, and they didn't have a ton of disposable income to do that. So figured out a way to volunteer and do the hobby they love. And actually our whole family was covered from that aspect. So they always made time to fit fun in. And it's definitely something that I consider role model behavior for my life. It's a balance to do that. You can definitely get consumed and work all weekend if you let yourself, but I always kind of go back to, you need that break to be the best you can be at work.
And so to that point, what are your aspirations, whether personally or professionally? Obviously being a CISO in work is an amazing feat and accomplishment. And again, kudos to you again. What is your aspiration? What do you want to be able to accomplish? Again, I would also argue you've already accomplished so much, not let alone skiing, obviously being a breast cancer survivor and so much personally. So what's on the horizon for Lori?
Interesting question. And just becoming the CISO, I have to reset a little bit. A couple of things. I really, in addition to taking it very seriously, being the CISO for Cardinal Health, I do take it very seriously just being part of healthcare as a whole. And partnering with other CISOs in the healthcare space to get the whole healthcare space more resilient and more secure is something that I see as my next area of focus. It's so important, and it's bigger than me. It's bigger than Cardinal Health. It's really for the best of all of us to make sure that we continue to focus on that. So that's super important to me. Continuing to sponsor folks here at Cardinal Health and outside of Cardinal, in and out of security is something I see as a legacy for sure for me. It is so great to see folks really develop their careers and get to where they want to be is something that I really find a lot of joy in, quite honestly. So that's really important for me. Other than that, I'm not sure yet what's next. So like I said, just becoming CISO recently, I haven't figured out that next chapter, but I see that it'll be continuing to be in this kind of protecting the company I love, the industry I love, the people I love. That's next for sure.
That's amazing. Again, when I think about protecting the company, the people that you love is, just again, tagline, bumper sticker. Love to hear that. And so I'm sure your teams appreciate that. Your colleagues, for life, if you will, appreciate that as well, just to be able to hear that. What's one of your kind of, best ways to get your team, whether that's, up, same, below, rallied around your vision? How do you help them? I heard you just mention, providing sponsorship and being engaged with them. Is that how you get them rallied, or, how do you keep morale up? Because sometimes, being in cyber, cyber never quits. It doesn't go to sleep. It's up on nights and weekends. So how do you help them stay engaged and rallied around your vision?
Yeah, definitely. The vision of always thinking of the patient first and being a trusted partner in healthcare is super important. Making sure that they've got that work-life balance, which it's even harder for them because, like you said, it's 24/7 and you can wake up in the middle of the night worried about cyber. I've had so many people say to me, "How do you sleep at night?" that's it's interesting, and to me, I have a great team, so I do sleep at night because I know they're after it, but making sure that they're really taking care of themselves and their health and spending time with their family and getting that downtime is super important. Even if you're in the middle of dealing with an incident or something like that, making sure that you're giving breaks, that, you're letting people get a break from it. Making sure they're getting out there in the industry and the same collaboration that I was talking about with my peers, that they're getting the time to do that. That's super important to people in security. So definitely making that a focus for the team and just having fun. We just did a Halloween day here, and my whole leadership team dressed up as cowboys and cowgirls, and making sure the team had fun and took a break is super important.
That's amazing. And I'm going to end on one question. I'm curious. Actually, I've got two questions left. One, I've heard you mention through my colleagues, that you've indicated in the past and historically that you've been the only woman in the room throughout the majority of your career. And obviously, I've seen that as we look at women in cyber or women in technology. How has that impacted you? And would you give any advice, or what advice would you have for other women experiencing the same situation?
Yeah, IT, obviously, there's a lot less women than men. I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but security is definitely even lower percentage-wise. And I don't usually think about it that much, but one of the first CISO events I went to after I became CISO was a dinner before a collaboration event the following day with other CISOs. And I was the only woman in a group of 30. And it just, times like that make me think about it. And number one, you can't hold yourself back. You've got to make those connections. But it is something we have to get after. And so doing everything I can to make sure women get opportunities here, and partnering with men to make sure that women are getting those opportunities. It's not about favoritism, it's about equality. So we actually have a pretty diverse team here at Cardinal, which I'm super proud of. But how are we going to see that across the industry? Because there's a lot of work to do. I'm super jazzed about Girl Scouts having a cybersecurity badge. What more could you ask for? So getting involved in that. One of the women on my team, which I'm super proud of, is sponsoring and on the board of a cybersecurity gala in Columbus, Ohio, that will go to providing scholarships for women that want to advance their cybersecurity careers. So those are the kind of things that are really important. And for the women that are in that situation where they're maybe the only woman at a security event, et cetera, bring a friend, number one, with you, another female friend, but don't back down from the conversations. Be part of it and take those opportunities when you can get them.
Love it. And now my final rapid fire question. I don't know about you, but I don't like to talk about defining success. My thing is, how do you define yourself? I often use words like I'm perfectly imperfect because I don't strive for perfection. And so how do you define yourself in your bumper sticker slogan?
What's interesting, and I swear, this was before I even knew about this podcast, resilient is one of my top ones. I've had a lot of challenges personally and professionally, and I always look at myself as I want to be the heroine of my life, not the victim, and I want to be super resilient.
Well, on that note, I am literally going to drop the mic because I don't think I can top that. So I want to thank you, Lori, so much for joining me today for our Resilient podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure to get to know you and to listen to the stories that you have to share and the great insights for our listeners. So thanks again for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us today. Again, Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Deb.
It was amazing hearing about Lori's experience and commitment to Cardinal Health over the last 20 years. She truly lives by protecting the company, protecting the family, and the people that she loves, and it's evident by her story. I found her individualistic approach to managing and motivating team members refreshing and was inspired by her advice to women to not be afraid to explore opportunities, to go big, to think big, and to think even bigger, even if you don't check all the boxes. If you like what you heard, stay tuned for more discussions with cyber leaders as we continue our cyber series, and to hear from some new hosts as we expand the podcast to also feature chief audit executives, chief risk officers, and other executives. Check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at Deloitte.com/US-Resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. Thank you so much for listening.